So, why me, I asked Pete. Well, the reason is that I don't often do circuits. My average flight time over the last 2 years is over 2 hours. I don't like doing circuits, they're not economic. So in a tight wad, I try and stay up. And that doesn't mean to say I only wait until it looks nice and soarable. I'll go as soon as I think it's soarable. So the topics I'll just cover tonight, which might not be exactly what you expected, but have a plan. Why and what? How to make a plan. Reading the sky, clouds. Now I know Mike's already covered that, but I'll just do a little bit more on it. From just bits I happen to have. Reading the ground, thermaling. That's one I've tacked on because I didn't think it was enough in the first bit, which is an old presentation from a while ago anyway. So a little bit agricultural, but if you're not all falling to sleep, we can run through that. And then summary key points, and hopefully there'll be time for questions while some people are still awake. So, moving on, why? Why do we want to plan? Any offers? No? Nobody knows why we want to plan.
Flying around, aren't you?
Exactly. Exactly. If you don't have a plan, you'll just wander aimlessly around, and you may or may not bump into lift. And what is it, 50-50, whether you bump into any lift? Then there's the additional bit about can you use the lift if you find it. So that's why you need a plan, to improve your soaring chances. When are you going to make a plan?
Before you fly.
A couple of days before.
Well, maybe, yes, Brian, that's a thought. I'd put before you fly, but a couple of days before, you might be looking at the weather and thinking, yes, is it a day when I think I can hack it? I've said before takeoff, that's when you finalise your plan pretty much, but before then you can be making some provisional plans, and then before leaving lift. So that assumes that you can find some because your initial plan was good enough, and then you actually, when you get to the top of your climb, where do you go? You need to make a plan before you get there, because once you get to cloud base, you can't see much. Whereas on the way up, you can see all around, you can see all the shapes of the clouds and see what's developing and what isn't. Okay? And what? Decide where to go plus plan B. What's plan B?
It doesn't work.
Exactly, when plan A doesn't work. It's no good just saying, right, I'm going to get to the top of the launch and I'll go to that cloud over there. And you get to that cloud and it doesn't work. So what do? You turn straight around and come all the way back. Straight through the same air you've just flown through that you know is sinking, but because you haven't got a plan B that says, if I go to that one, can I go to that one next before I give up? And that's the sort of thing you need to be thinking about the whole time. And if you think, I can only get to that one and come back, is there another option that I could get to that one, and if that doesn't work, maybe I could get to that one as well before I come back? And these are the things you can think about before takeoff, right? Stop me at any time if you want to ask questions. I've said we'll try and answer some questions at the end if necessary, but feel free to jump in any time if you think anything's not clear. Considerations. Well, the first thing to consider is don't mix up making the plan with doing your pre-takeoff checks. Easily done to get distracted in the middle of your checks and go, oh yeah, that's a nice cloud over there. Well, yes. So don't do that, please. What are your ambitions for the flight? In other words, what are you intending to do or hoping to do? Are you hoping to just have a soaring flight and a nice float around? That's fine. Or are you trying to do one of your qualifying half-hour flights or your hour flight? Or do you want your 5 hours? or you want to do a cross country. All those will maybe adjust your plan slightly, but what you might do is, if you only want to do a half-hour flight, you might say, I'll leave it for a little while actually, I'll let somebody else go first, because your plan is you want a half-hour flight and it's going to be easier a little bit later in the day. So that's the first thing to consider. Now you're looking around and you say, is anyone else soaring? Always a good clue. Don't be afraid to leech on other people. The glider performance and its range, and I'll come back to that a bit later on, but the glider performance can make a difference. You know, in my Ventus, yes, I can go quite a long way without finding lift before I have to start worrying about turning back or going to plan B. If you're flying a K8, then it doesn't go as far. Your experience and your currency, think about that. Just coming out of winter, or you're in the middle of winter, how current are you really? You know, have you done 3 or 4 flights in the last month, or have you done 1 flight in the last 6 weeks? That will colour just how you treat your ambitions. Are you going to go and say, I can get there and back? You know, and if it doesn't work, that's okay. I can still handle maybe a slightly low circuit, but you don't do it if you're not fully current and experienced. Think about the appearance of the sky. Look all round, and I've added and overhead. Something when you're sitting in the cockpit in the queue and you're waiting for a launch, you're all ready to just counter brakes, eventualities, all that business. You're going, oh yes, that cloud there, that cloud there. It's quite difficult to look overhead. Think about that and lean up and have a look. There might be a very nice cumulus just overhead that you can just go straight back to off the top of the launch. So that's how you make your plan, and you make your decisions beforehand. But plans need to be flexible. I mean, look at that sky. I took that in about 2008 or 10, but quite similar only about a month ago. Now we have very similar sort of sky with very little sunshine, low cloud base, about 1,500 feet. That day I took off expecting to do a little bit of hill soaring down at Wind Hill, and found there were gaps in the cloud and you climb up the side of the clouds, and went all the way to Buxton and back with a 1,500 foot cloud base. But it was actually fine. So plans need to be flexible, because I hadn't planned for that. I just planned a bit of hill soaring. But when the opportunities come, be prepared to change your plan. But when you change your plan, think again, is there going to be a plan B if this doesn't work? Okay. Anyone recognise where that is? That airfield? No? Nobody knows it. I'm sure Chris does, but...
You'd like to see it.
Needs his eyes testing now.
Yeah.
Robin Hood?
Yeah, it's Robin Hood. Well done, Keith.
Yeah, it's only because he's only got 1 runway, mate.
Yes. And it's a very long runway. Yeah. It was in the days before it was Robin Hood.
Yeah.
It was Finningley. And I used that just to sort of look at the sky there and say, what do you think about that sky? Imagine you're going to try and get down here. Try and get down here somewhere. Where are you going to go?
There's a big cloud over the end of the runway there.
Well, yes, there is. But if you look, the sun's coming from over here somewhere. So it's coming in that way.
Yeah.
So that cloud is a fair way away.
Fair way.
Yep. But this cloud here is maybe a cloud up here somewhere. But yes, if you want to go all the way down there, then you can look at I did some little clever bits for this. It's a little while ago now. So you could expect this there. Or, oops, move the cursor. There. Or there. That's a little cell that's growing there. But if you look, that is actually probably a shower. Quite a big shower. And on the edge of the shower, there's often rising air because the rain is pulling the air down generally, so it washes out at the sides, at the edge of the shower, and then usually goes up because something's got to fill the void. So that's why I would expect to find lift in those sort of areas, and then you're thinking, yes, I could hop on along to those clouds there. So that's the sort of thinking I would have reading that sky. There's an interesting looking sky, isn't it? You can see there's clearly flat bottoms and some definition to the clouds themselves in places. But nearby, close to the top of the picture there, fairly fuzzy and ragged looking stuff. So I don't expect to find much under that. But under the next bar of clouds, which is presumably a cloud streak, I would expect to find lift. Now, that was taken almost the same time, but looking in the opposite direction. So it shows just how conditions can change quite quickly. There you've got your more classic looking cumulus, but you see the way they're all leaning, telling you that the wind is going in that direction, from right to left. But certainly the ones more or less straight ahead look reasonably tasty if you're high enough to get there. But looking at that, I don't think it would be. So, what about cumulus? Things to think about with cumulus. Flat and concave bases. Generally, if a cumulus has a nice, flat, firm, concave base to it, then the chances are it's going up in the middle of that. So that's the first thing to look for, really. Firm Q with the top surface, they're growing. You can see them growing quite often in a matter of 10-20 seconds of looking at them. You can see whether they're actually growing static or going all fuzzy around the edges and feathery. If they're going feathery, then they're dying. There may still be lift under them, but it won't be anything like as good as if you've got the firm cauliflower appearance. Next, down sun. Down sun, if you're looking down sun, the Q looks better than up sun, because when you're looking down sun, the sun is shining on the edge of the cloud and it looks all nice and white and poppy. Whereas if you look the other way, it looks grey and miserable. Another one from the side, it looks better than from underneath. In fact, from any direction, a cumulus looks better than it does when you get underneath it, because very often you get underneath and you look up and you can see sky through. And you find that they're actually a lot less dense than you expect. Doesn't mean to say they won't work, but right. Now wisps. You saw wisps in those photographs there. They can be the start of a very good climb, cumulus, or they can be the end of a collapsing cumulus. So you need to, if you spot any wisps, keep an eye on them. You only need to watch them for maybe 30 seconds and you'll see whether they've actually disappeared or whether they are starting to generate a bit more cloud. So keep an eye on them.
So, I was always told that when you're climbing, you're looking for the next one, and you get time lapse, don't you?
Yes, you do. Every circle is about 20 seconds or so. Yes. Yep.
You can see whether it's growing or dying.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's very good, and it is surprising just what you can spot, and that comes with concentration. You find you can start a flight and do maybe the first half hour, and everything's going great, winding straight into thermals, you're picking the right clouds all the time, and then suddenly it all goes a bit pear-shaped. And what it more often than not is your concentration is lapsing. which is why the more you fly, the more you practice, the more instinctive your flying is, the less capacity, brain capacity, you need for flying, and therefore you can apply it all to all these other things, thinking about the clouds, the formations, where to go, what your plan is next. Right, sunny edge of Q often gives the best lift. Now, I've done a little story here, which isn't very good, I have to say, but let's imagine we've got a couple of cumulus drifting down the wind, the ground's at the bottom there. And let's put the sun shining on the ground, and then the ground warms up, and then what happens? And what happens is that the first bit of ground that saw the heat is the bit on the right, and that sees the sun just as the cloud starts to move across, and so that receives the maximum amount of heat, and at that point in time there's not much heat has come from the left hand end, it hasn't had enough time. So you can see those sort of rough representations of the amount of energy going up, and you can see that some of it misses the cloud. So in theory you can play around with that picture and you get the sun vertically, and it'll still show the same sort of picture but not as exaggerated. And you can play around with these things for a long time and justify all these theories, but it is one that you find quite often is the case, that the upwind edge of clouds is good. What else have we got? The downwind edge of showers, as I mentioned on the Finningley picture, can be good. Why isn't the upwind side of showers good?
Because the air is being suppressed. So you've got upwind edge. Oh, it's colder. It's the air itself has actually been cooled by the rain.
Yes, and so is the ground. The ground's been moistened, so it's going to take a little while for the sunshine to dry it out before it can warm it up. So generally the downwind edge of showers are to be avoided generally, but they can be good. No, sorry, I'm getting that wrong now, aren't I? Yes, the downwind edge can be good, but the upwind edge is to be avoided.
And also the downwind edge is you end up with a cold cleaver
Wedge, yes.
that just
Pushes in.
the warmer air up.
Yep. Right, high cover. Something that we see quite a lot. I was flying about a couple of months ago, doing only 100k or something, and halfway around it, suddenly a great band of quite thick high cover cirrus came over, and it just shut everything down. And suddenly I was scrabbling all around on quite a nice day with good thermals, and suddenly there was virtually nothing, and you have to go into survival mode. Keep your eye on the upper stuff as well, because it can be quite insidious the way it just suddenly appears. Sometimes it can move very fast, so keep an eye on that. I'm not really covering wave at all on this talk, but just say they can be stable where they sit there all day. They can also change far faster than cumulus. In a matter of seconds you can find a lenticular will suddenly form upwind and catch you out if you're not careful. So that was my relation to wave there. Now Q have a finite lifespan, and it's minutes, not hours. You may sort of think, you know, when you're sitting on the ground and having a cup of tea or something, that they last a long time. But how do you fancy this one? This hopefully will work as a little bit of time-lapse video. And you can see a very nice looking cloud there, isn't it? Got lots of firm bits to it. Obviously been steamy and growing for a long time. And when I play it, watch what happens. Look at that, really roaring up there. and then it starts to collapse a bit. Meanwhile, on the far right-hand side there's another cell forming. But this one will regenerate itself. Whoop. Now, that was 30 minutes in that full cycle, which gives you an idea. You can see the second one is now built up. Now these are big cumulus, these are big American, proper cumulus like God intended cumulus, which you don't often see in the UK, but it just gives you an idea that all that can happen in less than 30 minutes. Move on. Right, there's that same picture again that Chris can't read. And this time I am looking at the ground as opposed to the sky. And as I pointed out, that cloud there is from that shadow there. This is clearly another cloud up above me. And so that is the one I would go for first, because if I push across there, I may well be into their airspace before I get there. While fittingly we're certainly more amenable than Doncaster Airport, you still don't want to be barging into their airspace if you can avoid it. So that's why I would go across to the left first under the cloud that you can't see, because if I went straight across to my target that's on the wingtip, what have I got? There's virtually nothing. There's no cumulus at all when you look at the ground. So what's going to happen if I go out there? Might not find anything. If I do, where can I look? There aren't many thermal sources that are obvious. There's villages on the left here, Finley village I think, but there's nothing obvious heading out across the right hand end of the runway there.
Decent field though.
Oh yes, decent fields, yes. Hello, you're back to Dave Martin's fields again. So, yeah, that's the sort of thing to interpret when you're reading the ground. Now then, does that look good? No, it doesn't. There's no sun on the ground. If there's no sun on the ground, then the convection is not likely to be particularly good. So then you're looking at the ridges. So that's how you stay airborne under that southern sky. You can see in the far distance there may be some sunshine there. I apologise for the quality of photos, they were just arbitrary snaps taken, not for presentations and things. Right, where would you go on that one? Right, you're trying to stay airborne now, you're up near Cloud Base, but you're not particularly high. I think Cloud Base was about 2,000, 2,500 feet at best.
From the cloud to the sunshine.
Yes, you'd want to head towards the sunshine. First of all, there's a quarry that's in shadow, but that's worth taking in because it might have warmed up enough while the sun was on it. You may know that the sun hasn't been on it, it's not worth it, but at least you're heading in the right direction. You're now heading into sunshine where there's a decent sized village there. Well, in fact there's a couple that you could go to, try one, try the next one. So you've got options there, and further over to the right, more conurbations. So all potential areas, so long as you've got sunshine. Quite often, if you're getting low, the edge between the shadow and the sunshine is a good place to be, to pick up low thermals. When I say low thermals, I mean thermals that are kicking off from the ground rather than just being low. Right, coming close to home now and saying we need to get started before we can do all this cross-country business, don't we? So I just started saying, reading the ground, what are local hotspots that we know of? And you've got on the left, you've got Windhill. I couldn't really, it's not quite in the picture, but sort of over there. Win Hill, on the corner there, often kicks off thermals, if, you know, unless there's a northeasterly blowing or something like that. But, you know, if there's anything like a west or southerly breeze at all, or just light winds, it's surprising how often that kicks off thermals. You've got Hope next, you've then got the gravel pits near the cement works, you've got the cement works itself, you've got Bradwell, and you've got the end of the ridge. Now they all are reasonable thermal sources on a reasonable day. Any more anybody wants to add?
Mike,
Just on that picture. Yes, Keith?
just in relation to the cement works, on a day when both are in sun, is the works or the quarry the better place to be? Because the quarry has moved, obviously, over the years quite a long way west.
Yep.
Well, a long way west of the factory itself. I mean, which would you go for if it was a sunny day and both had been or were in sun?
I would tend to go for the cement works itself.
Right.
I find that very often that quarry doesn't seem to work well. Whereas you go to the one halfway to Buxton, what's it called?
Tunstead. Tunstead.
Tunstead, thank you. Tunstead and the one next to it. They tend to kick off thermals quite reliably, at least somewhere in the quarry.
You've got a massive trigger in the chimney, haven't you?
Yes, we have.
The kilns are operating at over 2,000 degrees, so there's an awful lot of heat floating around.
Right,
Yeah.
which is why the works is the best.
Does that make that much
better
difference, really?
Right,
Yeah. Yeah, but
2,000 degrees, that might melt your wings a bit.
Yeah.
Right.
We heard a story recently where a guy was getting low in a competition and he calculated how far it was to the new works at what was the place just below Oxford? Didcot, yeah. The new works at Didcot, where they've now not got the power stations, they've got these fan systems. And these fan systems are very low down, but it's the same idea, it's a cooling fan system. And he calculated quickly whether he got enough on his glide to get to there, and he arrived there with 500 feet and got a great climb. And got him home.
Right,
So
yeah.
people are using these sort of things.
Yes, yeah. It's sad that the power stations are being phased out generally.
They are, but they've still got some cooling aspects to them.
Right, yeah. And a lot of them still have coal tips beside them, or big areas of coal, which tends to warm up quite nicely in the sunshine. Right, I'm now resorting to Google Maps, I'm afraid. But just some other sources, and these sources work in different wind directions, so you have to think about what the wind direction is at the same time. I mean, Great Hucklow itself on the left there, surprisingly often it kicks off thermals, so you're right in the way of the launch. So less than ideal sometimes, but you can usually plan it. The Clough there, the second one just to the north of the barrel, that can be sheltered from the breeze. If you go for a walk down there, you can often find it's absolutely calm and warm down there, and as soon as you get up onto the top there's a breeze blowing and it's relatively cool. So that can kick off thermals quite nicely. The next one down is the fine grinding, the mine, big grey sheds, big area there, which is one of the reasons why the hang gliders launch off from the barrel there and fly to that, isn't it, Mike?
Yep.
So, and then down a T. So, okay, they're just some of the common areas around. So, still on Google Maps, what does that ring represent, do you think? Oh, I can't remember how far it is now. I did some sums. I was just thinking, you take a launch. How high is your launch typically? 1,200 feet? Good, decent launch. What height do you want to start your circuit at? Maybe 700 feet? Not reasonable for everybody here? So, you've got about 500 feet in which to find a thermal. So, that ring represents 40-to-1 glider going there and back, just flying straight out from the top of the launch, out and back. Now obviously if you've got a wind blowing, you need to move the whole ring in one direction or another to adjust it. But essentially it shows you can go quite a long way there and back, just assuming no lift, no sink in between, to try out some of the thermal sources. Then
That's the real eye-opener, that. I mean, you Mam Tor, you just look at that.
Yes,
Mam
you see.
Tor, Bamford.
yeah. Yep, so just gives you an idea. That's for the 40-to-1, and if you're not flying anything quite so grand, there's 30-to-1. And if you're still in K18, 25-to-1, that's, you can almost go to K8 that far. It's surprising how far you can go in 500 feet, all things being equal. I just wanted to bring that in and then put in some of the thermal sources that I think about when I'm flying. Now some of them are just a bit out of range, but that doesn't matter because the chances are you'll get a bit of lift somewhere along the way that you can maybe get 100 feet or so in a little bit of weak stuff and push on to there. But you can do your own sums on your own glider.
And subtract 30%.
Oh, for wimps, yeah.
No, because your achieved glide angle very rarely matches the manufacturer's given glide angle. And it all assumes you're flying at exactly the right speed, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So you might think that you've got a 40-to-1 glider, big go little mosquito. His actual performance is more likely to be 30-to-1.
Yeah, yeah, I'd certainly accept that that's the theoretical. And as I say, wind direction and strength make a difference to that as well. Because if you're coming back at 700 feet, you don't want to be, getting caught in curl over. But it's just food for thought. So now we'll come on to, we've got it 2008, so how are we doing for time? Okay for a bit, aren't we? Not asleep yet? No? Nobody's nodded off yet? Okay. Yeah, the art of the impossible. Touching thermals. It can be challenging. So for this one, think about what are they, how do we find them, how do we enter them, how do we stay in them, how do we get the best out of them, and how do we leave them? Then what? Okay. Some of it may be a bit tedious and we can gloss over it, but what are they? Well, let's start with what they're not. They're not round, they're not square, they're not any particular shape, they're a random shape. They're not continuous, they'll start and stop. You can find you do what you believe are two perfectly concentric circles and you get totally different lift on each one. So they're not consistent, same sort of thing, and they're not regularly spaced. So you can have two in quick succession and then nothing for the next 5 miles. So that's things to bear in mind about them. Anything else we should bear in mind about them? And shall we just look at what they are then?
They're not where you want them.
This is true. Quite often. So they're ever changing. They're not consistent. They're elusive, as Mike says. They're usually invisible. So you can see a cloud that says, yes, that's probably the top of the thermal, but where's the bottom of it? So not always easy to find out. And they are stronger in the middle, almost always. And when I say the middle, that's a core somewhere. It may not be exactly in the middle of the cloud or anything when you get to the cloud, but the core. There's a theory, I can't remember what the provenance of this slide was, but it gave quite a nice little picture of a typical thermal as you could visualise it. Notice the turbulent eddies. So when you're flying along and you're in fairly still air, and then suddenly the glider starts shaking, hang on, there's probably a thermal near here, because you get all these turbulent eddies around the thermal. You notice how narrow the thermal is pictured there. You notice the wind shift at ground level, because the thermal is drawing air in all around it. And you notice how it will broaden out a bit towards the top as you get cloud base. And that may be a typical wind profile, not a reliable wind profile on the left hand side there, but generally wind will tend to increase slightly with height, which is why they've pictured the thermal leaning over a bit. But that's the reason thermals lean over. It's not because the wind is blowing. If the wind was constant the whole way, once the thermal is broken away from the ground, it will be basically vertical. So when you're allowing for drift across the wind, when you're heading under a cloud, don't assume that it's at 20 degrees to the vertical. It may well not be if there isn't a wind gradient like that. Make sense? No? Stunned silence. Okay, stunned silence then. How do we find them? Oh, have a plan. I wrote this in 2008. Generally, search upwind. In other words, if you're coming off the top of a launch and you set off downwind, you're limiting your options. If you set off upwind, then it's much easier to drift back. If you find a little bit of weak lift, then you're at least drifting back into range while you try and sort out and get it centred and get climbing. If you're downwind of the airfield already and you're not really climbing much, you may be drifting faster than you're climbing to be able to get back. So, general rule of thumb, unless you've got an obvious reason for going downwind, go to other aircraft circling. There aren't many glider pilots who circle in sync. Well, not for long anyway. So,
Or birds.
So, I mentioned that one, don't retrace your track through the air. You've already been through that bit of air, so you know that's not going up, so find a different bit of air. Even if it's only 100 yards to the side, it increases your chances of finding lift. Fly under cumulus clouds, obvious, we've been talking about it for quite a while. Fly over thermal sources, or downwind of them. I presume you know roughly the theory of thermals. Sun heats ground, ground heats air above it, air rises, air breaks away from the ground, and the bubble or column of air continues upwards. But it may well not be any longer tied to that thermal source. There may be another thermal pops off because the ground is warm enough to be warming the air quite quickly and kicking off another thermal, which is when you get your cloud streaks. But what you need to do is to say, go over the thermal source if you're low, and as you're progressively higher, then maybe try just a little bit downwind of them. Right. Important equipment. Anyone recognise that?
Sandpaper.
Correct. Instructions for use. I'll let you read it. Yep. Because feel is the most important thing you can learn when you're gliding. Initially it doesn't feel like it, and when you get in a more modern, heavier glider, it gets a bit more difficult to feel the air, but you can still feel it. Even loaded up with water and things, you can feel the air, but it takes practice and time and learning. So that was my little bit of humour for the evening. So how do we enter a thermal? First, look out for other aircraft, because if you're heading for where you think there's likely to be a thermal, there's a reasonable chance there might be another glider in it. Even if you're 50 miles away from home, there can still be another glider in it. It's surprising how often you go into a thermal and then go, oh, there's a glider there that you hadn't seen beforehand. Enter at the right speed. Know where it is. If you know where it is, you can go in faster and then slow down once you're through the surrounding sink. But if you don't know where it is, if you're just going under a cloud and you're not really sure where it might be, then go in a bit slower. And if you fly through the sink a little bit slower, at least you won't fly through the lift when you get to it. If you feel it, maximum roll. All of everything, all your controls. Don't worry about accuracy of flying at that stage. You want to stay in that lift. Once you're in the lift, established in the lift, then sort out strings in the middle and all the rest of it. Strange thing for an instructor to say, I know. I'm sure Peter might dispute that slightly, but
No, I wouldn't dispute it at all.
it's,
The difficulty is getting two opposing philosophies across at once.
yes, it is. Yes, you want to fly accurately for efficiency, but if you don't feel it, when the vario rises, roll at the rate of increase of the vario. That's an interesting one. I'm not totally convinced about it, but I've read it in places. The trouble is that varios lag. Even the latest electric varios have a time lag in them, because it takes time for the air to flow in or out, or past the transducer or whatever it is. People tell you all about that in electron instrumentation, I'm sure. So you have to allow for that, and I'll come on to that in a minute.
So just
Yeah.
thinking about that, right, so
Yeah.
what do you mean by feel it? So,
Feel it is the sandpaper on your bump. You feel, oh, there's a surge, I pressed down in the seat,
right,
right? You feel that, get in there quick
yeah,
before you come through it and out.
Sorry.
Because you're travelling at probably at least 50 knots,
yeah,
maybe 60 or 70 knots even. So the good thing about flying at 60 or 70 knots is the control response is much faster. So at least you have more chance of getting into it and staying in it. Whereas if you don't feel it, then you've got to rely on the instrument.
Mike, just in relation to this same point, you would, as soon as you are convinced that you've got something, a surge or something, you would turn straight away. You wouldn't wait, as sometimes we have been taught to do, to count to three or whatever it is, each time you've flown through it, essentially.
Yes.
That's you would straight away, without knowing where you are in relation to the thermal you're looking to get into.
Yes, I would. As long as you feel a positive surge. If it's just sort of I think it might be getting better this, then just slow down and wait and tickle in. And then increase your rate of turn as you feel also your vario increasing. But
How do you decide which way you're going to turn?
if you can feel one way lift,
Yeah.
turn in the direction of the lifting wing. That's the only one I've got. What's his name? The soaring coach, the DJ, the self-styled. No, the self-styled. Kevin Atkinson. He has a theory that you can see the string go out that way, and it means the thermal's over there. I've never subscribed to that one, I'm afraid.
At the top of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just means you haven't flown very accurately just for a moment. But, yeah.
Mike, when you approach the thermal and you're saying to feel it, do you more or less take your hand off the stick at that point so that you can get a feel more for what the glider is going to do itself?
No, I have my hand on the stick at all times, I think I can safely say.
I don't mean take it off literally, I mean sort of very lightly fingertip on it so that the glider can talk to you a little bit more there.
I tend to fly with a light touch generally, unless I want to, turn into a thermal rapidly, which obviously increases somewhat. I'm heavy on the rudder pedals, but not on the stick. So I'll feel the stick move.
Do you feel generally when you're flying towards Cumulus, when you're going towards Cumulus, do you find that you tend to stick where you think the lift is on a particular side?
The,
So if you arrive at the thermal, is it generally on your left side or your right side?
I will normally target to go slightly left of where I think the core is, for example, if I want to do a right-hand turn. If I think I've been doing a lot of right-hand turns in this flight so far, I'll deliberately aim to the right of where I think the thermal might be, just slightly. So I'm anticipating turning one way. Doesn't always work, but you know, I think it just sort of increases your chances beyond 50-50 slightly. But
I find that one of the things that stops you feeling the thermal, and particularly the way it's going, is if you're a habitual stick twitcher.
yes,
So if you can't fly with a steady stick, if you're always sort of fishing for it with the stick, you won't feel what's going on outside.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's something that you know, Martin Cooper with his capstan comes to the rally every year. I flew with him at Tibenham. Didn't have a particularly long flight, but he said, "Well, you flight, I want to know what you do, watch what you do," you see. And when we landed, he said, "Do you know," he said, "I can't believe how little you move the stick." And that was what he took away from that flight. Didn't take anything else away because it didn't soar very well. But you know, he just said, "Yeah, you move the stick very little."
Porridge too.
It's just the way you fly, and you know, the more you move the stick, the more confused you get in riding it. So it's absolutely right. Don't fiddle with it unless you need to. Right, going on. A few facts and a bit of maths. Oh, now you can go to sleep. I've worked on a 40% bank turn, 360 degrees. Takes about 15 to 20 seconds. A typical mechanical vario lag is about 3 seconds. Pete, going to come in there? No?
You could have a long debate about vario lag, just keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It depends on tubing lengths and stiffnesses and all sorts of things. But to work on 3 seconds. So that vario lag is about 60 degrees in a turn. Because if you work on, say, 18 seconds for the turn, then that's exactly 60 degrees. Typical roll rate to 40 degrees, 1.5 to 2 seconds. So that takes you a little bit of time to get in there and get turning. 50 knots for 20 seconds. We cover 1,660 feet. I did these maths in advance, so I don't have to prove it. You can fiddle about with it if you want. And that gives a circle diameter of about 550 feet. So still a fairly substantial circle. You may feel as though you're turning right on the wingtip, but at 40 degrees you're actually not. You're going around quite a big circle. Higher speed, larger diameter circle. So think about keeping your speed to a low, safe level. When I say safe, I mean safe because there may be a glider just below you. I have experience of frightening people by not doing that. So I learned the hard way. So just a few basic rules. Maintain minimum, safe, steady speed in thermals. Maintain lookout. Maintain safe separation from other aircraft. They're obvious rules, just reminding you of them. Basic rules 2. Okay. These rules are guidance rules. They're not strict rules. The lift is increasing, increase bank. Now, that's the theory I subscribe to. Other people will justify to you that when the lift increases, you open up and turn. I'm just saying, this is the way I work. When the lift decreases, decrease bank. So that's your idiot's guide, if you like, which I find works for me pretty well. But the main thing you need to do is keep a picture in your mind of where the thermal is. And that's the key to thermaling, really. So when you're heading into a thermal, you're on a particular heading, you start to turn to try and find this thermal that you've just felt the vario go up, or you felt the thermal, and you start to turn and you think, I need to go back. And I'll come on to that with some rather crude diagrams in a minute. To say, I need to know what my orientation is in relation to ground features. Not the compass, because the compass either will be whizzing around in circles, or if it's a posh one, then it'll be moving round. But can you remember, was it 120 degrees or 140 degrees I was heading on when I was looking? Work with ground features. It's far more reliable. So, they're the guidance rules. Let's just look at a thermal. Now, my scaling isn't terribly good on this, so forgive me on it, but I'm just trying to get the concept over rather than anything else. So we start with glider flying in, clips the edge of the thermal. At point A, you can feel lift because you've just flown from sinking air into rising air. It's not rising very fast, but you can start to feel it. And by B, the vario's rising, but you're feeling sink now. That could be about 3 seconds, roughly. And all these are just to give you an idea, so don't pick me up on, oh, but that's 2.5 seconds, that's only 1.5 seconds. Gives you a concept. So now you start turning, and as you tighten up the turn, oh look what happens. You're circling almost completely out of the thermal. So at C, when you're already in sync, you've got the peak variant, because it's about 3 seconds behind. And at D, you've got zero vario, because you're just coming out of the thermal, because in reality you're at B. At E, you're in sync. F, the vario's still sync, but you're actually heading back into the thermal. There's several of these, so we'll start whizzing through them once you absorb the concept of it. So, how are you going to fix that? Same scenario, the field lift, the vario's rising, 3 seconds, you D-turn again, and you come round. See, you've got the peak vario, zero's now falling, so open up to fly reciprocal. This is your ideal. You get it dead right, you know exactly where you come from, where you're heading. So now you want to go back in the opposite direction. 3 seconds. 3 seconds back, turn again, tighten up. Oh look, you're right in the middle of the thermal. Hey, that's clever. So, that's a basic concept for how to do it. When the lift increases, increase bank. When the lift decreases, decrease bank. Same scenario. Field lift. Increase bank. Keep steady. Vario falling. Same scenario as last time. Is that still making sense?
Yep.
Got that 3 seconds in there again. And if you're flying with an electric vario, you might get that down to 1 second. Right. Let's look at a different one now. You've turned the wrong way. Bugger. That happens quite often. So what are you going to do about it? Yeah. Ideally, you could go straight back on the reciprocal again, but this time you said, I'm in sync the whole time. So therefore, after my 3 seconds or so, maybe slightly longer, turn right again, another 3 seconds back, and then you're turning again, and you whistle into your thermal. Next one. This is what I try and do, is go back in, turn more than 180 degrees. In other words, turn almost 270, no, not 270, 220, 225 degrees. Anyway, turn more than 180.
Because if you turn a 270 degree bank at B, it takes you straight to the middle. As soon as you realise you've fallen out of it.
As soon as you realise you've fallen out of it, if you turn...
At B, turn right 270 degrees.
Yes. Then you'd go back, you'd have to reverse your turn then.
No, follow it round.
Yeah, if you do a 270 degree turn from B, you'll be heading left to right, won't you?
Yeah, straight to the middle.
And you'll be heading across the bottom of the thermal. As it's pictured there, you'll be heading then, if you continue that turn on, you'll be heading roughly across the bottom of the thermal. In which case, to get into the thermal then, after you'd turn left. So I find it safer to not change direction of turn, because direction of turn works probably 1 in 5 times, but it's not a high percentage manoeuvre because you think the thermal's somewhere else at reversing the turn. So ideally I try and do that and get into the thermal that way. If you get it wrong and you've flown for your 3 seconds and started your turn and you're still not feeling any lift, then open the turn out, extend it round, and hopefully you will come back to the edge of the thermal and then be able to turn into it.
So at beat Cinema, your vario is still showing sink, isn't it?
Your vario is just starting to show lift.
Just started to show that, so it's getting to...
Yes, because your 3 seconds is roughly from A to B. So that's why feel is so important. If you can feel it, then you can do that fairly precisely. If you can't feel it, then you're relying on this sort of time counting and estimating, and it's far more difficult to do. So if you try and feel the thermals, that will help you. Is there anything else on that one? No. If you hit it centrally, 3 second back, feel lift, very rising but feel sink. AD, same principles, but this time you're only going for not a reciprocal, but more than a reciprocal. So similar to the scenario where you clipped it and missed it. So again, the sort of aim for maybe 45 degrees across your original track, but heading back is a way to find your way back into it. This is with gliders. I'm sure with hang gliders and paragliders it's totally different because the speeds are so different.
That's a big thermal for a paraglider.
Yes. But you still need to be in the middle of it, don't you?
Oh yeah.
Right. The fine centering. So you feel strong lift, you're feeling it. Now hopefully we're passing through a corner and we're feeling it. So we want to tighten up. When we tighten up, we increase in bank. We maintain the tight turn for 180 degrees, and then we open out. And we're still turning, but we're opening out. Then as the lift increases, as we feel the lift increasing, increase the bank again. And now we're set up for the inward core. Going around there, just like that. the scales aren't quite right on this, as I realised when I looked at it again. But I think they give you the concept, and the idea is try and picture where in space the thermal is in relation to you, and the fact you're whizzing around it, in and out of it. And the key really is to not go for the strongest lift, move towards the strongest lift, but move away from the weakest lift or the sink. The main thing to do is get rid of sink on your circle. So if you do a constant turn and you find on the south side of the thermal you've got a bit of sink, shuffle a bit north. And when I say shuffle a bit north, it's only take off 20 degrees of bank for 3 or 4 seconds, tighten up again, do another circle, see how it is. Have you got rid of that sink? If you've got rid of that sink, you're probably happy, because a bit of sink reduces your climb rate dramatically. You try and get a lift all the way around your circle as a target minimum. How are we doing for time? We're getting...
John will come in a minute.
Yes, you will, won't he? Yes, of course. Okay, so there you go. Perfection. Never happens. So, just a few thoughts here. Sailplane can take up to 30 to 50% of total time on cross countries. If you get it down to 25%, you're doing pretty well. But for your average cross country pilot, it'll be 30 to 50%. You can do this by looking at CU analysis after the flight. And on a cross country, doubling the climb rate increases distance by 15 to 25%. Probably even more than that. But that's what I wrote at the time in 2008. So,
when you say increasing distance, Mike, you mean the available distance, assuming that you were travelling cross country all the time?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Or it increases your speed, which increases your capacity for distance. Now, I said most pilots circle with a maximum of 30 degrees of bank. And you challenge yourself to look at the screws on the instruments, or if you've got a horizon, look at the horizon, turn it on, have a look at it and see what angle of bank you're actually achieving. And increasing it from 30 to 40% can double the rate of climb quite easily. So long as you're circling in the right place, of course. So you've got to thermal and get that fine centering in there.
40% should be 40 degrees.
I do mean 40 degrees, well spotted. That's obviously still right. Yes, I don't think anybody spotted that before, so... yeah, over 45% is difficult to achieve. You can easily do it for a turn, but you'll end up diving at the ground probably. It certainly is challenging to consistently maintain more than 45 degrees, so don't try and overdo it by saying this is a really good thermal, I'm going to stay right in the core of this, because the glider becomes very inefficient anyway, because most of the lift you're generating is inwards rather than upwards on the wing. Okay? When are you leaving a thermal? Just a few things to think about. Hopefully there are things to think about. Oh yes. Decide your next direction, your next landmark. So you should be doing this while you're climbing. So long before you get to where the thermal's weak, you need to be looking at where am I going next. Doesn't matter if you're just local soaring and you want to have your half hour or your hour flight. Where am I going next? Where looks to be a good thermal? And so think it's over towards Halices, for example. Okay, so I'll head off towards Halices as soon as this lift starts to weaken. It depends what height you're at. If you're only 1,800 feet, then maybe you don't have it straight away. But you take it to the top of that one first. But if you're at 3,000 feet, then fine, off you go and have a look. You decide what your thermal strength that you want to achieve is. if you're going on a longish cross country, you need to sort of say, well, okay, I've already had 2 3-knot climbs and a 4-knot. So I'll assume that we're going to have 3-knot climbs. And when the climb rate drops below 2 knots, I'm off. And set yourself a sort of benchmark, depending on the day and what your climbs have been so far. Your first climb of the day, just take it gently. You know, anything will do, just give yourself more than that 500 feet between 1200 and 700. Try and get yourself up to, say, 1800 feet. And suddenly you've doubled your chances of finding another thermal that's probably better. So don't leave too early unless you can see a glider circling and going up like Sting. Okay, that's fine to leave one at 1200 feet or 1000 feet, but not unless you're fairly sure. Set the McCready, vary on McCready for the next thermal. Well, yeah, I must admit I don't do that. But that's what the book says you should do. I rarely set the McCready, I fly to what I feel comfortable with. But you can actually set it and use it as a guide. Part of it may be that the speed director on the LNAV isn't particularly responsive, so it doesn't actually tell you what speed you should be flying at, particularly unless you've been flying at that speed for a while. Right, so still before you've left the thermal, look outside and below your circle. So you're looking outside the turn because there may be somebody sitting outside you doing bigger circles. Progressively increase speed because you're now going to fly out of the lift area into the sink. So you want to be flying faster as you go through that. You might as well build up speed while you're in lift, which is why when you look outside you look also below, because there could be somebody sitting in your blind spot below you. So you do it progressively, you don't suddenly go, we're off. It can be exciting in competitions because people sometimes do that. Okay, roll straight in the desired direction, speed through the surrounding sink. That's how easy it is, isn't it? No.
If it was, we wouldn't be here.
Well, why not? Remember the characteristics of the thermal. They're not round, they're not consistent, they have lifespan in minutes, they're not smooth, continuous, they're not regularly spaced. But they are stronger in a narrow core. So practicing your tight turns, achieving somewhere around 20 seconds, which is easy to check. You know, most of us carry a wristwatch which you can just keep an eye on. A second hand, pick a spot as you're going around, established in the turn, and say, oh, when does that come up again? Is it 25 seconds? Okay, I can do better than that. We're getting towards the end now. What can we do? Having got more or less centred, only make small adjustments. This is where I was saying, when you're centering in the thermal, don't level the wings. If you level the wings, there's a fair chance you might fly out of it, because thermals aren't generally that big. So make it progressive, 2 or 3 attempts, shuffling a little bit each time. It's far better, you'll waste less time overall. Actively centre, at least until there's lift all around the circle. Again, that's confirmed what I just said about move away from the sink. Visualise where it is. A lot of it's down to this visualisation in your mind. I think the thermal zone are that way, so next time I'll move my circle a bit that way. And if you lose it for more than half a turn or so, and you think, hang on, it's just disappeared, the chances are you have flown out of it. And what you need to do is to actually just open up your turn and go around, be a little bit patient, and the chances are you'll bump into it again. There are also things like CU and the other navigation programs. A lot of them have a centering assistant, a thermal assistant. When you read the advice on them, they, I think, pretty much all say it's there as a guide, but you will do better than the thermal assistant will do. If you've lost it completely, then have a look at that and try using that as a guide to find it again. But don't rely on it generally for precise thermaling. So then what? That's what you need to do. Practice, practice, practice. Don't just, if you're getting reasonably proficient, don't just go up and think, right, well, thermals are starting at 10, I'll take off at 11 o'clock. Go at 10 o'clock when it's all scratchy and difficult, because if you're on a cross-country flight or even on a long flight locally, there'll be a time when you miss a couple of thermals and you start to get low and you scratch, and you need to scratch in survival mode. So it's good to practice with weak stuff and broken stuff as well. That way you can take off early in the morning and have a nice long flight where you don't have to rush to achieve your target distance. So, summary of it all, always plan ahead, always have a plan B as well. Expect the unexpected. Just going back to the plan didn't work out. Oh, but I've come across some wave now, or something else. All sorts of strange things can happen. Keep your options open. Turn tightly. Keep coming back to that, don't I? Practice and enjoy. And if there's time, which there isn't, questions? You've asked a few questions, but any more?
Yeah, so you have a certain reputation for scratching and usually getting out of trouble. And you talked about thermal technique, presumably to a safe and sensible height. But
Yes.
what does the Mike Armstrong book say about getting down to say 500 feet and then connecting with the thermal and trying to climb up it from there?
Well, it depends. If I'm in the middle of the Camphill circuit, then I try not to do that. And certainly if I'm called on circuit, I won't do that. But otherwise, if you're over a field somewhere that you're down 500 feet, you should have picked your field and be starting the circuit, lead to it. And if you then come across some lift, you've got to say to yourself, now, what happens? If I turn, and I've turned the right way and I'm climbing nicely, great. All is well with the world, and I climb away and think I'm a wonderful chap. However, what happens if it goes wrong? Can I still make an abbreviated circuit and a landing in this strange field? And if the answer is no, then you just don't turn. You just carry on into your field. I've done very few saves below 500 feet, I have to say. At 1,000 feet, I'm thinking it's getting difficult this now. So it depends on the glide you're flying as well.
Yeah.
Because a K8 or a Sky or a 463 will slot in a very small space, but a Ventus or an Arcus or things, they need quite a lot more space. So yeah, don't scratch too low. And remember, you need to be able to fly accurately when you're under pressure.
That's the thing, isn't it?
That's where a lot of accidents have occurred, and there's an ongoing debate at the moment about should we always be doing final turns that finish wings level at 300 feet. Because occasionally, like off cable brake, for example, you may need to do a turn at 150 feet. It's still quite safe if you fly accurately in the conditions. So should we actually practice that a little bit more than we do? That's an active debate ongoing at the moment, so we'll see. But yeah, don't push it too hard. It's always better to have a retrieve, get back and do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Any more?
I think if you are a pilot who relies on monitoring the area and making your corrections for supposed lag and so on, then when you're down your circuit height, for Christ's sake, do not try and climb away.
Couldn't agree more.
If you're a pilot who can feel the thermals and you know when you've flown into the mother and father of one on the final circuit, it might be another question.
Yeah.
But until you get to that level of proficiency, don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say sometimes there's been some occasions where I've managed to thermal away at points where, not talking about circuits here now, when my battery has gone dead on me and the flight and the electric variant gone, and you're back to just actually feeling what's happening. I found that at times can be a good thing to do. Just switch the electric variant off and work on what's the guide's telling you, what it feels like. Just a question, Mike.
Yep.
If you're entering, you're going on your cross countries and you've put your speed on to fly and you now enter the thermal, is there a point where you're going to, rather than just turn, you might do a pull up at the same time?
I always pull up.
You always pull up.
Yeah, if I feel I've hit a thermal, I will pull up, climb, so it'll be stick in the back corner.
Yeah. What speed are you bringing it down to? Just above stall speed?
I'll maybe be down to 40 knots and just dropping the flaps just as I get to 40 knots.
Yeah.
If you've got flaps, obviously you haven't, you keep it just a little bit faster. And then obviously you're dropping the nose again, because what you're trying to do is to not go too far through the thermal.
Yeah.
You're trying to get it round as quickly as you can. So, but you've got to bear in mind that there may be other gliders around, so, which is why I say keep a good eye open, because when you go whizzing into a thermal and then pull up, you can gain a couple hundred feet. And the glider that didn't seem to be a problem to you is suddenly very close to you, or you to him.
It's quite disturbing when gliders appear from underneath you and do a chandelier.
Yes.
You thought you were going up well.
Yep.
Do you find also that the actual core of the lift is in the same place once you've established where it is at the start of the day? Do you find that the core of the lift is in the same place as the next cloud that you find?
In relation to the clouds?
Yeah.
Quite often, yes. But it does change as the day goes on, though,
right.
because the sun moves around in relation to the wind. Then it can vary. So you have to sort of be aware that what was working for the first half of the flight suddenly isn't working anymore, and you have to adapt. It also, you have to bear in mind that when you're on a different leg direction, so you've got round a turning point and you're now heading in a different direction, then things can seem different.
Yeah, sure.
If there aren't any more, can you call it quits?
Yes. Coming in from Chesterfield, in my experience, can feel quite daunting because you're coming upslope,
Good word.
into sun, into wind, and that last bit. So you might be able to make it over to Chatsworth or Kerber Edge, but especially if it's west or northwest, you feel like you're in sinking air coming off the lump. What route do you take when you're coming in from that direction to give you the best chance of actually making it that last 10k back into Camphill?
It does very much depend on the wind direction and the strength.
Right.
I have been known when coming in from maybe Chesterfield, Drumfield area, heading back, I've consciously gone round to the north, and on the basis that the Brookfield is there. But if I can get round on Shatton Edge and creep along there, I know Shatton never works, but at least it can help a bit.
Yeah.
And then round onto the west edge, even if I'm below it, then late in the day, the sun's on the slope, and even if there's no west in the wind, that can often work, and you can tootle along and just slowly and steadily climb. Several times I've come back below the edge when there's no west in the wind and climbed up there late in the day.
Right.
So if you can get there, I have once come back down the south edge and thought, well, I was climbing over Baslow, just a very weak, and I was impatient and saying, I want to finish the task. I'm sure I can make it. And then I clearly couldn't, and I did run out of options. I hate running out of options, I get scared. And I went across the top of Great Hucklow, probably about 20 feet above the chimneys. And I was doing about 65 knots. So I had enough energy to just tick around the corner and set off down the edge, but I was that low. And I still made it back onto the airfield.
Wow.
I didn't feel terribly good about it. Yeah, and I thought, mistake. But it's surprising how often the West Edge will work late in the day.
Yeah.
Just because of the sun on it.
Cool.
Okay.
Just quickly,
Yeah.
you mentioned that you're not a big fan of setting the McCready ring when you're leaving the thermal. You sort of fly at the speed it feels sensible to do. So you're just generally speeding up when it's bad and pulling back when it's good. How are you making
Yes.
that decision?
I suppose it's experience. I use the McCready ring, and I sometimes will use the McCready ring, but as I say, the LNAV isn't particularly responsive. So if I think, my next climb is going to be 3 to 4 knots, I'm hoping, then if I'm reasonably high, I'll maybe set the McCready to 2. And then once I'm cruising, I'll look at it and the LNAV will be saying, speed up or slow down, whatever, a bit, and I'll maybe take a bit of notice of it and just say, okay, at the moment I'm doing 80 knots, maybe I need to be doing 90. The Ventus isn't too fussy on the precise speed you do. It gets quite worrying if you turn it up to 3 knots. At 100 knots, it's saying go faster, go faster. No, this is suicidal. I'm going to need a thermal very soon. You are covering the ground, but yeah. So I'm a great believer in the McCready theory and all the rest of it, but in practice I don't follow it slavishly.
I think that's what I was looking for clarification. So what you're saying in essence is that yes, you do fly to a McCready setting, but you don't fiddle with it all the time.
Exactly, yes, yeah. Yes, I mean, as you get lower, you tend to back off the speed a bit, and a bit more, until you're tickling along at rest line. And hoping to find something. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming.